Good afternoon and welcome to our third Universal Meals listening session. I'm Gurjit Barea. I'm the manager of the School and Summer Nutrition Programs Administration section here at the Nutrition Services Division at the Department of Education. I'm excited to be joined today by our special guest panelist, Daryl Hickey, who's the Food Service Director at Pomona Unified School District. Before we dive into today's presentation, I just want to thank all of you for your hard work in ensuring that California's children continue to have access to healthy school meals while also actively engaging with us as we prepare for the implementation of the California Universal Meals Program in the upcoming school year. We're all very proud that California is the first state in the nation to support implementation of a universal meals program. And we here at the Nutrition Services Division are committed to continuing to support you in this process through these informational listening sessions, a soon to be launched Universal Meals webpage with additional resources, and of course, answers to frequently asked questions to help guide the development of trainings and policy surrounding California Universal Meals. In today's session, we're going to start by providing an overview of the Universal Meals program and reviewing some of the frequently asked questions that our team has received. From there, we'll shift our focus to the second key pillar of Universal Meals, the requirement of high poverty schools to implement one of the federal meal provisions. We'll talk in detail about the community eligibility provision, also known as CEP, as well as provision 2. And of course, because provisions do rely so much on direct certification data, we'll talk about some best practices for maximizing those direct certification matches. This will really be great information for program operators of all types, even if you're not one of those agencies that will apply for a provision in the next school year. Lastly, we will hear the local perspective of implementing a universal feeding model from our special guest, Daryl Hickey at Pomona Unified, who has had a lot of success implementing CEP at his school sites. So as we've discussed previously, there are 3 fundamental pillars that are integral to moving towards free school meals for all beginning with the upcoming school year. The first is updates to the state meal mandate. The second pillar is requiring eligible schools to participate in federal provision programs. And 3 is making sure that we provide state meal reimbursements to cover the cost of universal free meals. Let's take a quick refresher on what each of these pillars consists of. First off is the update to the state meal mandate. So beginning in school year 22-23, the state meal mandate will be expanded to include 2 nutritious meals during each school day for all children. So this means that schools must provide both a nutritiously adequate breakfast and a lunch each school day to all children, regardless of their eligibility status. The current state meal mandate only requires that schools provide 1 meal, and that meal only needs to be offered to needy students. The change will expand that to be both meals for all kids, regardless of their eligibility. The second pillar, and the one that we're going to spend a majority of today's listening session focusing on, is the requirement that eligible high poverty schools apply to participate in a federal meal provision, such as community eligibility or provision 2. Under California Universal Meals, high poverty schools are defined as those who qualify to participate in community eligibility provision. So that means that any school that has an identified student percentage of 40% or more must apply for a federal provision program. School Meals for All removes the option to opt out of a universal feeding provision for eligible schools. So in the past, there has been the opportunity for locals to not opt into this. Under Universal Meals, that option has been removed. The requirement to participate in these federal feeding models is really going to help ensure that the California Universal Meals Program supplements and not supplants existing federal funds. To determine if this provision requirement is going to apply to you, the easiest step to take is to calculate your identified student percentage, your ISP. First, you'll determine the total number of enrolled students at your school site, as well as the number of those students who are directly certified for free meals. You'll divide the number of students directly certified for free meals by the number of total enrolled students. This is your ISP, or your identified student percentage. If that ISP is 40% or greater, then your agency, that school site, must apply for one of the federal feeding provisions. It could be CEP, it could be provision 2, or it could be provisions 1 or 3. If that ISP is below 40%, you're not required to apply for a provision. However, you must still provide both a breakfast and a lunch at no cost to all students. Note that when you're doing this calculation to determine if it applies, that you'll need to do it on an individual site-by-site basis. And we'll take a look at an example later in the presentation on this as well. The third piece, and really critical to success, is the funding. So beginning in the 22-23 school year, the state of California will provide additional funding to supplement the federal meal reimbursements for breakfasts and lunches. So this additional funding will really ensure that local operators receive the same reimbursement for all meals served, regardless of whether they are claimed at the free, reduced priced, or the paid rate. The stipulation here is that in order to receive this funding, that you must be participating in the federal school breakfast program and the federal national school lunch program, and that you continue to comply with all of the applicable federal requirements. One way to think about how the program will be funded is to consider the amount of reimbursement that you would receive for a free breakfast or a free lunch under the school breakfast or national school lunch programs. Beginning in the 22-23 school year, all of your meals will be reimbursed at that higher free rate. The pot of funds that make up that reimbursement will vary based on the meal type, but the total funding provided for each meal will be equal. Next, I want to review some of the frequently asked questions that we've gotten so far about the Universal Meals program. And I really want to commend all of those of you who have submitted questions to us. The feedback that we're getting is really critical, and it helps us to prepare and administer this program. As I mentioned earlier, we're really going to do our best to answer additional questions through the Q&A feature throughout this session. But I'm sure that there are going to be some areas that, maybe we're still waiting on for clarification, or that we simply don't have the answer. So if you do submit a question today and we don't get a chance to answering it, I really want to encourage you to submit that question to our Universal Meals inbox. That is Universal Meals, plural, SY22 at cde.ca.gov. This is the inbox that we're using to track all the questions that are coming in, and it's really helping for us to develop and update our list of frequently asked questions. So let's go ahead and dive right on into those. So the first question, when are local operators required to implement the components of universal free meals? So the three components, those pillars that I've previously talked about, go into effect beginning in school year 2022-2023. The law applies to public school districts, county offices of education, and charter school sites. Second question that we have is, what meals can we serve and claim to meet the program requirements? So as with the federal programs, local operators can claim one meal during each meal service. So in other words, one breakfast or one lunch served to a student each school day. You do have to make sure that those meals comply with the federal program and nutrition requirements. So if you've got questions about those program or nutrition requirements, you can visit the CDE National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program Meal Patterns webpage, and we'll drop a link into the chat for you there. Do note that you can't provide two meals during the same meal period to meet this requirement. So serving two breakfasts to a child or two lunches on a school day would not meet the intent of universal school meals. It must be a breakfast meal and then a lunch meal during the lunch period. The next question we have is, do after-school snack or supper meals count towards that two-meal requirement under universal meals? And the answer simply is no. You have to offer a compliant breakfast and a compliant lunch under school breakfast program and national school lunch program in order to meet these requirements. While after school meal supplements, those snacks are great, they're not considered a meal. And so providing a snack in place of breakfast or lunch, it does not meet the intent of the Universal Meals Program. So which students are eligible for the Universal Meals Program? So once again, all students attending a public school district site, a county office of education site, and a charter school site are eligible to receive a free breakfast and lunch if they request one, regardless of their eligibility status. There are some exceptions, and the one notable one is for those non-classroom based charter schools. Those sites are not subject to the new state meal mandate. Typically, those students are not attending a physical school site, and so that is the one instance in which those students you're not mandated to provide 2 meals to those kids. And what about those low poverty schools? You know, what if I don't have a lot of free and reduced price children? Are we still required to participate in the Universal Meals Program and receive the state reimbursement? So the answer is yes. If you're a public school, a county office of education site, or a charter school, you are required to provide those 2 nutritionally adequate meals. However, it's really up to you if you want to do it through the federal programs. But if you want to receive that state meal reimbursement for those meals, then you must participate in the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program. In the Universal Meals Program, there's no minimum free or reduced price eligibility requirement to participate. So even if you're a low poverty school, you can apply to participate and you can benefit from this great program. So how much reimbursement is going to be provided? So the Universal Meals Program, it was done through the budget process, so it is subject to budget appropriation. However, the way that the program is designed is that the state is going to provide supplemental funding that covers the difference between the federal free reimbursement rate and the reduced price and paid reimbursement rates. So as I mentioned earlier, this means that any local operator that's participating in both National School Lunch and School Breakfast Program, it will receive the federal reimbursement rate for meals served by student eligibility type. And then you'll get additional state meal reimbursement. That is the difference between the federal and state free and reduced price reimbursement amounts. So let's look at an example, excuse me. So let's say during the 2019-2020 school year, if a school lunch was served and it was claimed by a paid student, the federal reimbursement rate for that meal was only 32 cents. Under the Universal Meals Program, this meal would be eligible for an additional $3.09 in state meal reimbursement. That additional reimbursement brings that reimbursement up to the level that you would have received had that meal been served to a student who is eligible for a free meal. If you have questions about reimbursement rates, you can find those on our CDE rates, eligibility scales, and funding webpage. We'll go ahead and drop a link into the chat for you to reference that. Question 7. So does the California Universal Meals Program require that breakfast be offered to students in the classroom or after the bell? So no, the Universal Meals Program does not, it does state that breakfast must be offered, but it does not mandate the breakfast model that LEAs utilize. So you have the choice to choose which breakfast model best fits your school site's needs. So, we do know that breakfast after the bell and breakfast in the classroom are highly recommended as best practices because participation is shown to increase under those models, but it is not a requirement under this program to offer breakfast through one of those options. You can offer it before the bell or in either of those two, recommended options. So if you have, want to get more information about USDA's resources on alternative breakfast models, you can visit a toolkit here that we're going to put into the chat for you as well. The next question, so does the new state meal mandate apply when students are not on campus? So if they're, independent study students or if they're attending school virtually? And no, the state meal mandate only applies when students are on campus. So we know that this year, many school districts have students that have opted to participate in independent study or other virtual programs where their primary learning is done away from this campus. Under these models, children would only be you would only be required to provide meals to those students on days in which they physically come to campus for educational instruction. So, if the child is participating remotely, that mandate does not apply. And that really fits in with the guidance under the National School Lunch and School Breakfast Program when we're operating in a world without a lot of the federal waivers that we've had over the last couple of years. So the next question, we've talked a lot about, getting that free reimbursement rate. If we're going to get the free reimbursement rate for all meals, why is it that some schools have to apply for a federal provision? And this really has to do with the intent of the Universal Meals Program. This is not designed to be a standalone program. It's designed to comply with the school nutrition program requirements and to supplement the programs that are already being provided at the federal level. So, those universal feeding provisions, especially, CEP, can really help to increase the amount of federal reimbursement that comes in. And that really speaks to the sustainability of California Universal School Meals as a state program. So kind of in line with that, do schools still need to collect free and reduced priced meal applications if all children are receiving free meals? And the question is yes. So, schools that are participating in National School Lunch and School Breakfast still do need to collect meal applications. So all of those federal regulations are still in play when it comes to the determination of eligibility. Those meal counts that you're going to submit, those will still be, claimed in accordance with the individual eligibility of each child, the free, reduced price, and paid categories. Now, there are some exceptions, right, to collecting meal applications, and those primarily are for those schools that do operate a provision like CEP or one of the other provisions. But generally speaking, if you're operating what we refer to as a standard counting and claiming site, you will still need to send out, process those meal applications in order to comply with the federal requirements. So I do believe that is the last frequently asked question that we will review today. We do have a much more exhaustive list of frequently asked questions on our webpage that we'll link in the chat for you. If you have other questions or comments, as I mentioned, just please continue to email those to the Universal Meals inbox, so that way we can continue to include those in future updates and consider them as we develop our policies. So moving into the next part of our presentation, we're going to shift our focus to really that second pillar of universal meals, the requirement that very high poverty schools apply to participate in a federal meal provision. And we're going to focus primarily on the community eligibility provision and provision 2. As I mentioned in kind of the overview, for the purposes of universal meals, we define those very high poverty schools as those that meet the eligibility requirements to participate in the federal community eligibility provision. So currently, that minimum is a 40% threshold as of April 1st in the prior year. So if you meet that 40% threshold, then you are eligible to apply for CEP. And again, under community eligibility provision, we're only really looking at that percentage when it comes to the number of kids who are directly certified for free meals. That second pillar, again, is really designed to reinforce that California Universal Meals is designed in a manner that we're supplementing and not supplanting federal dollars. So to meet the requirement of the bill, if you are a high poverty school, you can apply to participate in any one of the provisions. It could be provision 1, provision 2, or provision 3, or the community eligibility provision. We do know that, especially under CEP, the amount of federal reimbursement that comes into the state will be significantly higher because of the CEP multiplier. And so that is going to be the provision model that we focus most on today, as well as because over the last 4 or 5 years, it has become the most popular provision model that's being used in California. So let's take a little bit of a deeper dive here into CEP. So CEP, community eligibility provision, is a 4-year reimbursement option for those eligible high poverty school districts and school sites. While you're on CEP, schools serve both breakfast and lunch every school day to all students at no charge, which may sound very similar to the universal meal program requirements that are going to kick in starting in the 2022-2023 school year. Local operators do have the flexibility to choose if they want to have schools participate individually in CEP, if they want to group school sites together in order to meet the minimum 40% eligibility threshold, or if they're able, they can have the entire district participate. While you're operating that CEP, federal reimbursement is based solely on the percentage of students who are directly certified. And under the Universal Meals Program, the state reimbursement will really step in to cover the cost of any meals that are claimed at the paid rate of reimbursement. So, if you apply and implement CEP beginning, in the 22-23 school year, you'll really have all of your meals reimbursed at the free rate. So some of the benefits of being on CEP while you're operating that CEP provision, you're never going to have to collect meal applications. So that also means that you don't have to perform verification activities. So if, I know many of you over the last 1.5 years have chosen to shift to those simpler alternative income forms, you would be able to continue to utilize those if you implement CEP as a feeding provision in the upcoming school year. As I mentioned, LEAs that are on CEP, you don't have to track meals according to individual students' eligibility. Simply, you serve the meal and you just take account of the number of reimbursable meals that have been served. We do know, we've seen from nationwide studies that schools that implement CEP have increased participation in their meal programs. And of course, with schools that are on CEP, will continue to maximize the federal reimbursement because of that USDA multiplier, which really, thinking long-term and sustainability will ensure that the state funds that are set aside for universal meals will continue to go further. So the minimum qualifications, so those eligible school sites or districts must have that identified student population, identified student percentage of at least 40% as of April 1. For the 22-23 school year, we'll be looking at data as of April 1st, 2022, so just in a couple months from now. Federal requirements do state that you cannot round up to meet the minimum requirement. So for example, if you do your calculation and you determine that your ISP is 39.95%, that does not meet the threshold. It must be 40.0 or above in order to be eligible for community eligibility provision. So when you're participating in CEP, that reimbursement is really determined based off of your identified student percentage. And I know we covered this earlier, but I'm going to reinforce it again because it is really a key pillar to community eligibility. You calculate your identified student percentage by dividing the number of directly certified students. So that includes students who are directly certified as foster, homeless, migrant, runaway, or in Head Start, by the total number of students that are enrolled, and then multiply that number by 100. The federal reimbursement is based off of that calculation, the ISP, multiplied by 1.6. So that 1.6 number right now is what the multiplying factor that's been set by the USDA. So you take that ISP and you multiply it by the multiplier, and that will give you the percentage of meals that you'll claim at the free rate. The remaining meals get claimed at the paid rate. However, with that Universal Meals Program stepping in to supplement the federal programs, the state reimbursement will cover the percentage of meals claimed at the paid rate. So in the end, while you may be getting money coming from multiple buckets, you will receive the free reimbursement rate for all meals that are served. So let's take an example and put some numbers in here. So here we have XYZ school district, and this school district has a total enrollment of 1,000 students, 500 of those who are directly certified for free meals. So in this instance, we would calculate the district's ISP by dividing 500 by 1,000, which gives us 0.5. We multiply that by 100 to turn it into a percentage. We have an identified student percentage of 50%. So this site is eligible to apply for CEP. So let's take a look at how this factors into the district's reimbursement. So XYZ, they have that ISP of 50%, and then we still have the USDA multiplier, that 1.6. So we take 50 multiplied by 1.6, that gives us 80%, which means 80% of the meals that the district serves in any given month are going to be claimed at the free rate, and the remaining 20% of meals that they serve are going to be claimed at the paid rate. So in this example, we're using reimbursement rates from the 2021-2022 school year, but just remember, rates do get updated annually, so these calculations will change as time goes. The free lunch reimbursement rate, including commodities and the Prop 98 state funds, is currently $4.39 and change, and the paid rate is 83 cents and change. So here we would multiply those numbers by the respective meal counts. So the 80% of meals served at the free rate, we do that multiplication by the $4 and change, and we get a total reimbursement of $1,758. And the remaining 20% gets claimed at the paid rate. We do that multiplication, and we see that the federal reimbursement comes to just $439.62. So here, is really demonstrates the reimbursement that the state, is going to kick in. The district here would receive a total of $2,198 for lunches served in December, which is equal to what they would have received if they were claiming 100% of those meals at the free rate. So if they had met the magic number of 62.5% ISP that we have talked about in the past, under the Universal Meals Program, everyone is going to be getting that free rate for all meals that are served. One of the one of the concerns that we often hear from districts when we talk about implementing community eligibility provision is that because they're no longer collecting meal applications, they won't have the data that they need for local control funding formula purposes. So, LEAs that participate in CEP and other provisions, you still have that need to collect students' individual socioeconomic status to determine that funding under LCFF. So when you're operating CEP, this is really done through the collection of those alternative income forms. So I know many of you have become more familiar with these over the last 2 years, given the USDA waivers in place. But these forms are really much more simple to fill out than a meal application, and it collects that minimum data that you need for LCFF purposes. We do have some sample forms on the CDE CEP webpage under the LCFF tab, and we'll get a link in the chat here to you shortly on that as well. One thing to note, if you are implementing CEP and you are implementing those alternative income forms, that the cost of processing those alternative income forms cannot be paid for with cafeteria funds. And And further, you can't reference the National School Lunch Program or the School Breakfast Program on the alternative income form. These forms are really meant specifically for local control funding formula purposes, and so it's important that we retain a distinction between the alternative income form and the federal meal programs. Next, let's take a look at how do we apply for CEP. So first things first, as we have mentioned in a lot of the town halls, really work with your program analyst and let them know, hey, I do intend to apply for CEP. This kind of sets that the ball rolling downhill, and it'll really help us to ensure that you understand the application process, that you get those dates marked on your calendar, and that you get all of that required documentation into place. The next step will be then to get the data together. So you're going to pull your enrollment list from your schools on April 1st, and then you're going to start pulling those direct certification lists from CalPADS on April 7th. The reason we say April 7th is because there's a little bit of a lag in the statewide direct certification before it's available to you. So the data on the 7th will actually reflect the figures from the start of the month. When you're using those direct certification lists, you can use those CalPADS, the statewide match, the California Longitudinal Pupil Achievement Data System, as well as any local county lists that you receive from liaisons. So, those would be like your homeless students, students who are identified as foster, and those who are identified as migrant. We do have, some schools that only use CalPADS, while others rely more heavily on those local county lists. And that, either approach is fine, but we certainly encourage, schools to always pull the direct certification list from CalPADS as a best practice. When you're pulling those lists, just be sure that when you're saving that you're saving it in the original .txt file format. That shows us that it is an original CalPADS list. You can always do a save as later and turn it into a data form that's a little bit easier for you to work with. But you always want to make sure that you're keeping that original .txt file for us. So the next steps in applying for CEP, you're gonna, submit the forms, right? We have 3 forms that are required. We have the SNP 19, which is an amendment to your free and reduced price policy statement. You won't be taking individual meal counts anymore. So this just is an update to those procedures. We have the SNP 55. So this is a form that you'll complete that basically shows us how you're doing your calculation of your identified student percentage. And then the third is the SNP 71, which is a more of an exhaustive checklist to make sure that we do have all of the forms that are needed in order for the application packet to be complete. You can find these forms in the Child Nutrition Information and Payment System, CNIPS, download form section under those form ID numbers that I just mentioned. And then in addition to these forms, you'll also upload all of the source documents that you used to calculate that identified student percentage. So that might include, that original CalPADS extract I mentioned in that .txt format, as well as any local county list that you used to determine what your identified student percentage is. Do note that now we're asking that all documents be uploaded into CNIPS attachments and not mailed in to the to our physical offices. While I'm here at headquarters today, we do have most of our staff still working remotely. So you can find that attachment section by going into your school nutrition programs application table and clicking on application packet. Once you have everything uploaded and you think it's ready, then just shoot us an email at cep@cde.ca.gov. That kind of is the formal process to notify us that you're applying, and then we'll get moving on verifying your identified student percentage. So the deadline for applying for CEP is June 30th, 2022. So, that may seem like quite a ways away, but that day will be here sooner than you know it. So we really encourage those of you who are interested in CEP to, at the big, mark your calendars for early April. Make sure that you pull those lists, and then start working on completing and submitting the application on time. We do know that, CEP, I've talked a lot about direct certification and these different lists. And so we do want to spend a little bit of time talking about some best practices on how you can maximize that direct certification rate to make sure that you're getting the most out of the federal reimbursement, or, if you're on that cusp of meeting that 40% threshold, some of these best practices can help to kind of push you over that threshold and to be eligible. So direct certification, we often just refer to it as DC. It's that federally mandated process that all school nutrition program operators must use to certify children who are eligible for free meals without completing that application. So direct certification is really using state and local agency data related to different assistance programs. So in California, we're talking CalFresh and CalWORKS, and we can use those to determine if a kid is eligible for free meals. Those public school districts, county offices of education, and charter schools, can conduct direct certification by doing a local match through your county Department of Social or Welfare Services, and by using the statewide database CalPADS. CalPADS does a lot of things. It's a pretty robust data system, and it's used to maintain individual level data. So it has student demographics, course data, discipline assessments, staff assessments, and lots of other data points that are used for state and federal reporting. But for purposes of our school nutrition programs, it does help us to identify at the state level who is indeed on those eligible programs to be directly certified for free meals. I do want to note that, and I think I've mentioned this a couple times, not everybody has access to CalPADS. CalPADS is only available to public school districts, charter schools, and county offices of education. So if you're a program operator that's another type, maybe a private school or a non-public, then you would be relying on your local county matches to do your direct certification work. So CalPADS really matches the student information that's been uploaded by local school districts against statewide data that identifies students and families that are receiving CalFresh, CalWORKS, and as well as Medi-Cal recipients at the Department of Social Services and the Department of Healthcare Services. So at the state level, that match is conducted on a monthly basis, and then local operators are able to then download a report from CalPADS that is generally available between the 5th and 7th of each month. And like I mentioned earlier, April 1st kind of is that magic date for community eligibility provision. Your CalPADS extract will come between the 5th and the 7th, just based upon the lag time that it takes for us as a state agency to do all that matching and report the data back out. But the report that you get on the 7th will reflect data from the 1st. So for those program operators that even if you're not eligible for community eligibility provision and you're doing standard counting and claiming, we really, really recommend that you conduct a direct certification match on a monthly basis. These reports are available at the beginning of the month, and it's if you have a CalPADS person, it's simply a matter of just downloading the list. The reason we recommend that you do this on a monthly basis is because CalPADS is a live database, and it's only going to match against students that are currently enrolled at the time that the report is pulled. So we do recommend that in order to get the most accurate results, that you make sure that you've updated your enrollment before you run that report, and to always enter July 1 in the student certified since field to capture all the students from the current school year. So that July 1 is important because once a student is directly certified at any point in the school year, that indicator follows that child for the remainder of that school year. And then, as I mentioned, it's really important that that you're retaining all of that direct certification documentation for your records. So, CalPADS, the data cannot be restored if enrollment has changed. So, we often will get questions of, well, oh, can I go back and run a historic CalPADS report from a certain date? And unfortunately, that's not a capability of the database because it is a live database and is constantly updating. So if you're running a direct certification match, the key piece to remember is always save those documents for your records. Another really critical best practice for direct certification is to extend the household benefits for those students that are getting CalFresh, CalWORKs, and Medi-Cal. You can extend those to siblings and other children that are living in the same household. So, you may have an instance where, for whatever reason, one child shows up as directly certified, but their sibling does not. You can extend that benefit to the other child and count that as part of your direct certification match. You can also, use those other source categorical eligibilities. So we mentioned, working with your local level liaisons and identifying those homeless students, runaway students, migrant students, foster, and Head Start. You can also use those to bump up your direct certification counts. The one difference between those source categorical eligibilities is that those do not extend to the household. So, for example, if you have two siblings in one house and one of them is identified as foster, you cannot automatically extend that benefit to the other sibling. If it was a CalFresh or CalWORKs determination, then it could be extended. So at this point, you're probably thinking, well, Gurjeet, this is a lot, and we know it is, and so it really takes a community. So you've got to make sure that you build relationships with your local social services agency, and communicate regularly to really kind of establish a process where you get a monthly report of those CalFresh and CalWORK students. You can compare those local lists to the CalPADS list to ensure that each student is indeed directly certified. Working again with those, with your homeless, runaway, migrant, foster, and Head Start partners to again establish a monthly process to identify students that are enrolled and identified as eligible under any of those different areas. And then, of course, building relationships with IT and student enrollment staff. We do recommend that child nutrition programs have access to CalPADS, so that you can run that report as needed. But if you don't have that access, having an IT administrator that you can work with to get access to that information is really critical. And in the same way that we're providing some of this training today here, to share the information and train staff on why it is so important to maximize direct certification. Not only does this help ensure that if you're applying for CEP, that you're maximizing your individual student identified student percentage, but you're also ensuring that students are getting the benefits that they really, really do need. So I mentioned earlier, while the CEP is certainly the most popular provision in California, and we are using the CEP qualifier to determine if this requirement to participate in the federal provision applies. You do not have to apply for CEP if you meet that threshold. There are some other options, but again, I really do want to emphasize that from a funding perspective, that CEP really is what makes the best use of federal funds. So outside of CEP, there are 3 other provisions: Provision 1, Provision 2, and Provision 3. Provisions 1 and 3, I think are I think they are extinct in California. We may have 1 or 2 operators statewide that are still utilizing those, but we do have a number of agencies that still do operate Provision 2. So we'll take a little bit more of a closer look at Provision 2 as an option. So P2, it's another option that those high poverty LEAs can apply for to meet the requirements of universal meals. It still does require that LEAs serve meals to all children at no charge, but it reduces the application burden of schools to occur only during the first year of a 4-year cycle. So you still do collect meal applications one time under Provision 2. And that is done during the first year of your cycle. We call that a base year. Provision 2 also simplifies the meal counting and claiming procedures by allowing schools to claim a meal reimbursement based on percentages during the later years of that base year cycle. Those years are referred to as non-base years. So under Provision 2, really that the first year of operation will look very similar to standard counting and claiming. It's in those later years of operations that you get the benefits. So why might a school choose to operate Provision 2 over CEP? Well, the first one is kind of obvious. If you don't meet that CEP threshold, right? So under community eligibility provision, you have to have a minimum ISP of 40% in order to be eligible. Under Provision 2, there is no minimum threshold requirement. So you may use that to kind of help streamline some of the administrative burden that comes along with the school nutrition programs. Another option is, we do have schools that have student populations that, for the large part, are not directly certified for free meals. They lean more heavily on meal applications to establish eligibility for students. So, so if you have, if you're one of those schools where your direct certification numbers are on the lower side, but the meal application counts are high, then Provision 2 is a very viable option. And just to kind of add, because you're only collecting those meal applications during the base year in that year one, you can utilize those meal applications for LCFF reporting purposes. So this is what we refer to as establishing an LCFF base year. So it really, again, helps to kind of streamline the administration related also to LCFF and ensuring that you have the data that you need to maintain your funding levels there. And then lastly, unlike CEP, when that Provision 2 cycle ends, so year one, you establish your base year. Years 2, 3, and 4, you operate under this streamlined administration. At the end of that 4 years, if you can meet specific criteria from the USDA, that provision cycle can be extended for another 4 years. So USDA says that if you can use a metric to demonstrate that the socioeconomic situation hasn't improved beyond a certain percentage, that you can extend that Provision 2 cycle. So again, it allows for some flexibility there. Whereas if you're on CEP, once that 4 years ends, it's over. You've got to start again from scratch. So applying for Provision 2. So who can apply? So any LEA can apply for this. If your school is operating on a traditional school schedule, then the deadline to apply for Provision 2 is June 30th. If you're on a year-round schedule and you have classes that start a little bit sooner in the school year, then the deadline to apply is June 1st. As with CEP, if you're interested in Provision 2, lean on your S&P analyst. Send them an email, let them know that you're interested in applying, and our team will then reply with you on instructions on how to apply. You can find a list of your analysts in CNIP's download forms, form caseload, and I'll drop a link in the chat also where you can identify who your county specialist is. Next, I'll dive very briefly into Provisions 1 and Provision 3. Like I mentioned, while these are they're still available. They still recognized at the federal level as provision options, and they do have some of the same benefits as CEP and Provision 2. They're very rarely used. Like I mentioned, I think they may actually be extinct in California right now. So Provisions 1 and 3 are 2 federal provisions that are still available. These provisions provide some methods for reducing paperwork and other administrative burdens by simplifying the traditional operating procedures for meal eligibility and meal counting. However, it's not quite as streamlined as CEP and Provision 2. And so I think that's why we find that they are so rarely utilized. We really do recommend that if you're looking to operate one of the provisions, that CEP or Provision 2 is really the way to go. But if you are interested in learning more about Provision 1 or Provision 3, we do have information on our CDE provisions webpage, and we'll drop a link in the chat for you there, and you can read more about it. Okay. I think at this point, you guys have certainly heard enough of my voice for this afternoon. So I'm very excited to transition to our guest speaker, Mr. Daryl Hickey. So Daryl is the Food Service Director for Pomona Unified School District, and he's worked in the food service industry for 20 years. Daryl's very passionate about being able to serve all of his students. And it was always a goal to be able to provide meals to families who rely on the meals so students can focus on learning. So welcome, Daryl. Take it away.
Oh, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much. I just want to start off by recognizing, I appreciate everybody's time. I know there's a lot that the extended food services families are going through. You know, there's a great story of two lumberjacks where every morning they start chopping wood at the same time, and every day they stop chopping wood at the same time. And every day one of the lumberjacks disappears for about an hour in the middle of the day, and every day he chops more wood than the other guy. And this goes on for months. And eventually the one that works all day says, you know, I don't understand. Every day we start at the same time, and every day we stop at the same time. And every day you disappear for about an hour in the middle of the day. And every day you chop more wood than me. You know, where do you go for that hour? And the other lumberjack looks up and goes, oh, I go home to sharpen my axe. So during this time, I just want to make sure that all that are out there, make sure that you're taking time for yourself and protecting yourself with everything that's going on. So again, my name is Daryl Hickey. I'm Director of Food and Nutrition Services with Pomona Unified School District. And at the end of this presentation, my goal is to kind of give a thumbnail sketch as to what we do in our district. And at the end, I'll have my contact information in there. And if I can kind of start off by saying, you know, when CEP first started, I kind of equated it to kind of like an IKEA project. You know, you open up the box and you go through everything and you put it together, and then you look over at the end of the project and you look and you still have parts left over. So what I'm going to be presenting is kind of what works for us, and there's multiple parts and there's multiple facets to all of this. And so this may not exactly fit yours, but there's going to be parts that you can interchange and kind of go back and forth with, but this is just kind of a basic for what we have. So just to kind of give you an overview, we're one of the most eastern districts in Los Angeles County. We have about 21,800 students. We have 39 school sites, and we have also been experiencing declining enrollment up before COVID and through this time as well. So pre-CEP, we were about 87% free reduced. And what's ironic is our district is very different in the sense that I have some schools that were very high free and reduced and some that were very low free and reduced. So the one thing that was really important is we didn't want to have an us versus them type of mentality. So we wanted to make sure that we combined everything together. We do have families that, you know, you may have an elementary student, a middle, high school, and we didn't want to have, well, why does one of my students get fed at no cost and the other one has to pay? So it was really important for us that we have it, you know, spread all the way around and make sure that it was fair and equitable for everybody. We are 100% CEP right now, and this is we're running into about year 4. And one thing that I know it's a 4-year program, but what we end up doing is we keep reapplying every year. So our first year, we ended up hitting like a 97% free percentage. So we applied because it made sense for us. And then we reapplied the next year and we maxed out at the 100%. And then we keep reapplying every year to make sure and basically start the clock over. For a couple of things is, one, it keeps us current and, you know, keeps, you know, restarting the clock. And the other sense is too, is in the event that something happens where we actually had the opportunity where at one point an Amazon facility was bidding to move into Pomona. And we thought, you know, we're CP now, but what happens if an Amazon facility moves in? I have a feeling things might change. And so at least it gave us the opportunity where if we're 100% one year and then the next year, let's say it went down to 95, we could go, okay, what direction is this continue to go in? And it gives us some leeway where we wouldn't necessarily reapply, but we'd keep running the numbers to make sure that what we're doing makes sense. And in an ironic twist, the declining enrollment has also actually increased our CEP percentages. And one thing that we started to do research with is a lot of our families, if they're on any kind of assistance, might be rooted in our community. And so they don't have the ability to necessarily leave. They might have additional benefits or getting some kind of assistance, and everything is established in our community. So those that leave may not be on any kind of assistance, so those that are remaining are. So when CEP, before we started, we were kind of on the bubble of it, and we're like, do we do it, do we not? We're kind of looking at it. And then all of a sudden, as enrollment continued to decline, all of a sudden it was like, okay, well now it makes sense, and it's continued that way. So I'm going to kind of share some of just a real overview of some of our best practices. The first thing that we did was we met with cabinet level to explain the program, because what I'm finding is, at least for us and hearing from what some other districts, if you don't have that upper management support, it's really difficult, because it's a great program, but at the same time, if you don't have everyone behind you, you're going to run into some challenges. So cabinet agreed on the benefits of the program, but then what I told them at the end was, now what happens if there's no applications? And there was like a hush over the room, and everybody was like, they went from, yeah, we went to the program, to, okay, wait, what? What's going on? So what was really important was, as we discussed it, they really realized, you know what, this is such an important part of the process. What do we need to do to still capture funding information? So instead of the alternate income form that a lot of times the food services office have to do, they moved it to the online registration. So as families register, they go through, and some of the questions that are on there are able to capture that information. So the district captures all of their needed information, so food service no longer has to provide that information. Really makes it nice too, because all those times you get a call from your district office where they're like, hey, can I get, the free and reduced percentage from my district, or I need to know 9th graders because of discounted testing or things like that. We can refer them all to our IT department, who captures all of that information. So when we started CEP, we realized and saw immediately their biggest increase was at the secondary level. Traditionally, because we're K-12, the elementaries are like, the kids are dismissed, they go to lunch, everybody pretty much eats. Junior high, not so much. And then at the high school, there's a lot of different, alternatives at the high school level. And one thing that I had been told in the beginning, and I was kind of questioning, because I was like, this program's still new, and I saw it, you usually see 2 years of increases and then it levels out. So as an example, year one, my elementaries went up about 3%, my junior highs went up about 7 or 8, and then my high schools went up 10 to 13%. So that was the first year. And it starts off slow. It doesn't like the first day all of a sudden thousands of kids come rushing. It starts off slow, which is kind of welcome, because there's a lot of kind of newness to all of this, and then it increases. So by the end of the year, I saw those increases. Year two, it was very minimal. It was single digit increases, but at that point we had kind of seen all the benefits from the program. And then this is just kind of a quick little snapshot of what families will see when they register. So basically you can see where, total household size, and then the household income. And basically the number and the income relates to free, reduced, or paid. And so our IT department actually captures that information. That's the same that we would be looking at when it comes to getting families income and qualifying them. That's what they do on that end. Okay, one of the big things was when we presented this was marketing, because we were such a high free and reduced district to begin with, there was that negative stigma with, oh, free lunch, free meals and stuff like that. So we got rid of the term free, and it's a no cost meal program. So what was really important is, we would kind of promote, students don't pay for their books, they don't pay for the desk they sit in, they shouldn't have to pay for their meal or do any kind of paperwork. So it's a no cost meal program. So we tried to start changing the mentality and the thinking with that. We do have, between the high schools and some of our higher paid percentage schools, we started marketing it as a supplemental meal, because we had a lot of families who would send lunch with their students, but then we'd also say, you know what, those of us that have had kids have always, go to make a lunch that morning and you run out of bread, or you didn't have milk or something that's going on. So we'd say, hey, look, this is always made available. It's here, breakfast and lunch. If you're running behind, something happens. There was also a time where we'd say, look, if you want to send your child or your student with a sandwich or whatever the entree is, have them come through the line, get a fruit, get a vegetable, get a milk, get the, treat of the day, whatever it is. Oh, and by the way, there's no cost to it. So because of that, and because of that promotion, we actually started to see more increases at those and started to see a bigger shift with that. Another thing that we started to do was targeted the sports coaches. As an example, the beginning of the year, football is happening. So a lot of times the football players during lunchtime would go to the gym or go to the coach's classroom and to watch film and things like that. So we wouldn't even have the opportunity to serve them lunch. So we started reaching out to the coaches and saying, hey, we know that nutrition is such an important part of what they do. Why don't you have them come through the line, get their lunch, and then take it to the classroom? And then we continue with that throughout the year with the sports that would leave for the day, and have away games. And we say, hey, a lot of times your players are, bringing snacks to take with them. Have them come through lunch, save their snacks for, when they arrive at their location. What was really important too is, I was a lone voice trying to really promote this, but meeting with the PTA and the PTO groups, if you can get your parent groups on board, and if you can share all the information with them and let them be your voice, that's really, really important. Because I actually had people coming back to our office who did not believe that meals were not going to cost anything. I had one woman come in and we had to translate, and they were explaining to her the program, and she starts crying because she couldn't believe that there was no cost. I had another gentleman come into my office and he says, I heard that my kids don't have to pay for meals anymore. And I said, no, they don't. And he's like, are you sure? And I was like, sir, I'm the director. Here's my card. If there's a problem, let me know. But people couldn't believe it because it was such an amazing opportunity. Another thing is with ASB classes. This is really big, especially at the high schools, because sometimes there's a stigma with lunch and you're trying to break through that. So it was really important. I met with all of the ASB classes and we shared nutritional information with them. We shared the benefits. We had discussions about vegetarian meals and vegan and new items, and we kind of went over what components were, and we asked them to help remove the stigma of free meals. And they really jumped on board. They saw themselves as leaders in the school, and they really realized that if they see their leadership doing stuff and promoting it, then they'll do the same thing. We also made daily announcements over the PA, because again, when we rolled this out, your due date is in June, but you're not starting until the following year. So you've got some time to kind of really amp it up and promote it, and doing the daily announcements when school starts. Because again, they're coming back from summer, you're now serving meals at no cost. They don't really realize that, or they've forgotten. So you have to kind of start that engine going again. And obviously social media, any kind of avenue that you have, there's a lot of things like some of our schools have their own school websites. We do those kind of things. I met with teachers, and then obviously, Facebook and all those kind of things. What we did was, before it rolled out, there was like a 6 to 8 months of just continuous promotion. We knew that CEP was going to happen. It was just a matter of what percentage we locked in at. And so we started before and just really promoting it, flyers, anything that we could do just to get the word out. Be prepared. There are going to be some things that we weren't prepared for, and it's things that you go into it and you think, oh, okay, I've got all these things dialed in. There's still things. As an example, obviously, if you're serving more students, you're going to need more food. And if you need more food, all of a sudden you need more storage, which might mean refrigerators and freezers. Oh, and by the way, if more kids are eating trash, so all of a sudden there's more trash cans. We actually had to have discussions with custodians about getting more trash bags, liners, trash cans, more pickups, those kind of things. Paper supplies, labor. We're fortunate, from what I've seen from us and from other districts as well, is it starts off slow, so you have your ability to kind of train your staff and kind of get them up and running. But looking at what your labor is going to do. Equipment. One thing too, I told the sites that where a lot of kids didn't eat, we warned the principals, as this starts, you might start to see longer lines, to be prepared for that. But the alternate happened where the lines were longer, but there was no cash there's no cash transaction. So the kids were actually going through the lines quicker. And also too, when there's no cash, that means there's no deposits to do at the end of the day, which actually was saving our managers like 20 to 30 minutes a day. So that was a cost savings so that they could focus on something else. And also I paid for a money pickup. So I had an outside company that would do the money pickup, and that was no longer needed. So as you're going through, there's some, things just to be aware of, and there's some a bunch of cost savings. And so when I went into CEP, I thought, even if I broke even, I'm going to save money on pickup and all these other things. So it definitely, came out ahead. So again, that's just kind of a quick overview. This is my contact information. If there's any, questions or anything that I can do to help, it's a great program and definitely a benefit to our community. So I thank you so much for this opportunity. And if there's anything else I can do, please let me know.
Thanks so much, Daryl. I feel like every time we give one of these CEP presentations, I come away with, different new nuggets of information. I think, your approach of almost, it takes a community, right? So I heard a lot of engagement that within your district, working with your, I'd heard the cabinet level, but being so wise as to reach out to those coaches on campus and working with custodians when, you start seeing participation increase and grow. I think that's really a great best practice that, we certainly appreciate you sharing with folks. I think one of the pieces that I kind of wanted to follow up, if you don't mind, just what did that participation growth look like, for you guys kind of in those, maybe when you first jumped on CEP and has that growth maintained? I know you mentioned you have a bit of a declining enrollment, but what has participation look like?
Maybe I can answer the question directly. When we looked at our sites, we basically put a list together and we said, we took enrollment and attendance and then participation. And so we identified if we had a school where 99.9% of the kids were eating already, we didn't really focus on that school because we knew the kids were already eating. What comes to mind is one of my high schools, we had about 800 kids that didn't eat every day. It was a very high paid school. So what we looked at is like, where are the opportunities? Because if you're serving 90%, 99% of your kids at one school, that's not the focus. You've already got it dialed in. It was focusing on the schools where, what is the potential for increase? And so that's what we really focused on, is those high schools and middle schools where like, we've got this group of students in front of us that are not eating. What do we do to bring them in? So that's really where the focus was, and making sure that we really promoted it. ASBs were key, and really getting the word out there. And it was like the more emphasis and time that you put into it, you started to see it. And what was helpful was, it didn't start off going back to that one school. If we had 800 kids that weren't eating, not all 800 showed up the first day. The first day might have been 5, then 10, then 20, then 30, then 50. And all of a sudden, you've got an additional, 3, 4, 500 kids coming through, but you've built up to it. So it kind of, it makes sense. So now what we're finding is we're maxing out, after we've done this for so many years. But it's just the continual involvement, and then it's going back and revisiting those ASB groups and the parent groups and saying, hey, here's the new items that are out there, here's what's available. And then what happens is there's this unseen word of mouth that goes out, that it's like, what, they don't have to pay for meals? And again, it's not that it's free meal or it's free food, it's a no-cost meal program. So again, because we promoted that, the word of mouth between parents and families is so valuable. And so that's what really, really helped us.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. And then the other piece I want to highlight before we jump back into the presentation is that strategy of reapplying for CEP. So, I mentioned earlier to folks as I was talking about kind of the overview of CEP, it is a 4-year cycle, but you don't have to wait for that cycle to end in order to reapply. And so I know we've had, you shared your experience. We've had a lot of districts that are almost on an annual basis reapplying for CEP to either try to further maximize what that percentage looks like for their district, or at a very minimum, even if it's level, if it's the same, you're extending that, the end of that cycle out for 4 years. So that's definitely, a great strategy that we certainly, recommend that schools look to implementing.
Absolutely. It's amazing when you start to get close to that 62.5% maximum percentage. It's even at 60%, going up to 60 and a half or 60 and 61, the revenues are so much more. And so it really makes sense that even if you can reapply and it goes up 0.5% over the entire length of the year, it totally makes sense. And also, when you start this year, I think you're thinking in your mind, okay, what happens if this doesn't continue? Well, you've got 4 years to figure it out, kind of thing. So at least you reapplying, or at least continue to do your numbers, keeps you kind of your finger on the pulse of what your community is doing. As an example, this year we also compared to what we were last year, so we can kind of see, are we ahead, we're behind, and we're getting to 62.5% faster than we've ever gotten to it, before. And so, redoing it and applying, and we'll just continue to do this so that in the event of something does happen, and next year it goes down to 61 and the following year it's 50 or whatever it is, we're still maxed out, but it's like, okay, trends are changing, what's going on, what do we need to adapt to if we need to go back to meal applications?
Yeah, that's great. And to put in context for the rest of the audience, we talk about maximizing that CEP. You may think, well, if the state's going to cover the additional funds, what's it matter? Well, where it comes into play is, one of the concerns we hear is, well, what if there's not enough money? What if California hits a rainy day 10 years from now and there's not funds there? The more money that we're drawing down from the federal programs, the longer and further the state reimbursements that the legislature has committed will continue to go. So thanks so much, Daryl. Always appreciate you taking time out, and glad that you're able to share your experience with Universal Meals through CEP with all of our districts today.
Thank you so much.
All right, so kind of as we move towards the end of our presentation today, I do want to continue. We are working on answers. We don't always have all of them, and so we are certainly continuing to gather valuable input. So there are some areas that we're specifically looking to hear ideas and suggestions, and you can drop these into the Q&A. You can also email these to the Universal Meals inbox. But suggestions for how 2 meals can be provided on those days when it's a minimum day. If kids are only on campus for a couple hours, or a lot of school districts have half-day kindergartners that are only on campus for a short period of time. What are some strategies that schools have had to be able to successfully offer both a breakfast and a lunch to those kids? In one of our future listening sessions, we will be focusing on small school districts and charter schools, and so some best practices from those of you who are operating the programs or are going through the process now, to just share, how is it that you plan to make this program a reality, and then similarly to how Daryl shared earlier, just outreach and communications. What are some best practices in terms of marketing strategies and how you're reaching out to families and children to let them know that, hey, this program is coming, and yes, we really are going to be feeding you at no cost. So next, we'd like to just share a number of different resources. We know, we anticipate that we do have a lot of folks here on the call who are new sponsors, or you're interested in the program and you may not already be operating. So the first link that you have there on the slide is our new sponsor information. And so this really kind of walks through the full process that is required to become a sponsor of the National School Lunch or School Breakfast programs. We do have a very robust community eligibility provision information webpage. I know we had a pretty lengthy presentation on CEP, but believe it or not, we could keep going. There's a lot to unpack there, and our CEP webpage does really do that and provides a lot of additional resources that we, frankly, just don't have the time to get through today. And then both the provisions and direct certification web pages, again, more information there. We do have some trainings that are pre-recorded that you can go online to in our course catalog and listen through at your own pace to just get refreshed with those. A couple other reminders before we wrap up. So in addition to Universal Meals, the legislature did step up and provide $150 million in kitchen infrastructure and training funds. So a reminder that the funding is non-competitive, but that we do need agencies to opt in order to receive funding. So that registration deadline is quickly approaching. Close of business 5 p.m. This Friday, January 14th. If you haven't done that yet, don't worry. It's a very simple registration form, but we do want to make sure that folks get that in. We'll drop a link in the chat to our Kitchen Infrastructure and Training Funds webpage, where you'll find more information there, as well as a link to the opt-in application. Our next two upcoming sessions for Universal Meals on February 8th, we'll be talking about a school breakfast program and strategies that schools can use to either start up or expand school breakfast operations. And then in March, we're going to take a look specifically on how charter schools and those small school districts can implement the Universal Meals programs. So keep an eye out in your emails for registration information for the February session. You can also access it on our Nutrition What's New webpage. It will be posted there as well. Again, our contact information. So our Universal Meals inbox, I want to emphasize meals. It is Universal Meals plural sy22@cde.ca.gov is really if you had a question that did not get addressed today, to please make sure that you submit those questions there, so that way we can continue to do our work to make sure that we're providing you guys with all of the support that you need. We did have a number of kind of common themes and questions that came in through the Q&A that I'll just take a minute to go over before we wrap up today. So first, we'll start with just some questions around the state meal mandate. Asking, when does that state meal mandate apply? And so there's really kind of, two pieces here. The state meal mandate applies on all school days. So that means, if it's a minimum day, if it's a Saturday school session, if a child is coming on campus and they're receiving instruction, if you're collecting average daily attendance for those students on those days, then the state meal mandate does apply. And beginning in school year 22-23, it'll mean that on those days that you're offering both a breakfast and a lunch to those students. The exception is instances where you have a child who may be enrolled in independent study and is not physically on campus. So, if that child is at home and receiving instruction, virtually exclusively at home and is not physically on campus, then you're not mandated to provide that child a meal. Now, if that kid comes to campus, whether it's for taking an exam or getting some tutoring, that child must be offered a meal. One of the kind of more nuanced questions that we've received is, well, what if that child just, comes on Wednesday at noon and drops in? Do I have to offer that kid a breakfast at noon on Wednesday? No, what it means is that your meal times must be open to that student. So on Wednesday that child comes to campus, you would have a breakfast, scheduled in the morning, and you'd have a lunch scheduled in the afternoon. As long as that child has the ability to come to campus and receive those meals, then you are meeting the intent of the state meal mandate. The other exception is for non-classroom-based charter schools, and that's very closely related to kind of that independent study and virtual school model. Non-classroom-based charters are really kind of the forefront of those virtual type academies. And so the same way with those non-classroom based charters, if the child is not, physically on campus or physically at a resource center that's associated with the school, then the state meal mandate does not apply in those instances. The other question that we had was about the minimum threshold for qualifying for community eligibility provision. So early on, we talked about there are really kind of three ways that schools can choose to participate in community eligibility. You can choose to participate as an individual site. You can choose to participate as a group of sites, or you can choose to participate, district-wide, kind of how, Daryl was sharing in their experience. In terms of determining the universal meals requirement to participate in the federal provision, that determination is made at a individual site level. So if site A has an identified student percentage of 45%, that site must apply to go on a federal provision. If site B is at 38%, they don't quite meet that threshold, so they are not required to go on to a federal provision. You may still choose to do so under provision 2, but it is not a requirement unless you meet that minimum 40% threshold. So you should be doing those calculations at a site level to determine if the universal meals requirement does apply. So I think that really kind of wraps it up for today. So again, I just want to thank all of you for joining us in this listening session. We understand all of the energy and preparation that goes into launching such a huge and crucial program like Universal School Meals in California. But as I said, we're so proud that we're the first state to implement this, and we look forward to continuing to support all of you as we build up to the launch on July 1, 2022. So for CDE Nutrition Services, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks.